So why might it be harder to figure out verbs? And one answer is that there's actually quite a bit of variation when it comes to verb meaning, and one of these points of variation has to do with motion, and in particular for the verbs of your language, what information do you like to package together with the verb? So to make this more clear, we have an example here. In English, you might describe a situation where you have this goblin and he fell into a river and he's moving down it and he's floating, right? You might describe the situation as the following. The goblin fell into the river and then floated down it. Okay. Now the Spanish equivalent of this, if you use duende instead of goblin, el duende cayó, fell, the goblin fell, en el río, into the river, y después, and then, salió flotando, left floating, right? So floated down it, left floating, right? So we're packaging together the same information, but we've distributed the same information across different words. In fact, to make this more clear, float involves motion, so go, we can think about that, plus floating, right? That's packaged together into the word float. And then the direction, right, so the manner of floating is packaged together, but the direction is separate. It's this preposition down. In Spanish, you've packaged together the direction, to go, and then down or out, to leave, and then the manner is a separate word, floating. Right? So you can see that the verb here in each of these languages, in English we're packaging together the manner of motion, and in Spanish we're packaging together the direction of motion. That's a point of variation that occurs. So again, the manner of motion is encoded together with the verb in English a lot of the times, while in Spanish the direction of the motion is encoded in the verb. So if you're trying to figure out what a verb means, you have to figure out how to package together these pieces of meaning, and it takes kids a while to figure it out, to become aware of the language-specific preferences for verb meaning. So a study in 2010 actually found this extremely interesting trajectory, where if you test English and Spanish 2-year-olds for what their preferences are for what information they like to package together with the verb, both English and Spanish 2-year-olds show a default preference for encoding the direction of motion in a verb, and maybe because that information of direction or path is more salient, who knows, but both English and Spanish 2-year-olds like direction, so they like to say left floating, effectively. While English and Spanish 5-year-olds now flop over to preferring manner of motion. So remember, English in general prefers manner, Spanish in general prefers direction, but your English and Spanish 2-year-olds are behaving exactly the same way at 2 and 5. They're at 2 preferring direction and at 5 preferring manner, even though their input from these languages varies in that respect. So at 2, your Spanish direction of motion is consistent with Spanish, but not with English, but your English 2-year-olds are still doing it. And at 5, manner of motion is consistent with English and not Spanish, but Spanish are still doing manner, right? So there's this interesting trajectory of figuring out what kind of information your language likes to package together with verbs, but by adulthood you figure it out. So English speakers seem to maintain their preference for encoding the manner of motion in a verb, while Spanish speakers recover their initial preference for encoding the direction of motion.